Ladies and gentlemen, hello again, and welcome back to Don't Worry About the Government. My name is Chris Novembrino. I am coming to you live from the Casa del Nove in the news kitchen, drinking my coffee. I'm on my second or third cup of coffee. I've been sparring with the computer today to try to figure out a way to do the high fidelity audio, but also retain the video. And once again, like John Henry. Well, no, John Henry won. I didn't even do as well as John Henry, but I'm going to survive the encounter. But man lost to technology is really the moral of this story here. But that's not really what I'm here to talk about today. I'm not here to talk about the inevitable obsolescence of man to machinery. No, I'm here to talk about improving machinery, mechanicals, infrastructure week. It was infrastructure week. Did you smell it? It was infrastructure week. Infrastructure was everywhere. I like infrastructure. You like infrastructure. Who doesn't love infrastructure? It makes me happy. It makes you happy. I know it makes you happy. I know it does. And it appears that we are once again people on the cusp of a highly infrastructure week. What do I mean by all of this? I mean that for the last several months, the big gambit by the Biden administration and the one that has been pushed by centrist types is this idea of working across the aisle with the Republicans, who are, of course, slowly coming to their senses following the defeat of Donald Trump, which they all accept and have deeply internalized, working across the aisle to create an infrastructure bill. And you know, I like to bash on Joe Manchin and Susan Collins and Kristen Sinema and their politics and their centrism. And certainly, I will not stop complaining about the outsized amount of power that these three people have relative to the size of the population that they represent. We are talking about a senator from Maine, Arizona, and West Virginia. Arizona is probably the biggest of them. And who does Kristen Sinema represent in Arizona is certainly a live question. Like you could say that she's got the biggest population that she's representing, but I don't know that she's really representing what the Democrats who got her elected voted for. And it doesn't really seem like she's winning over Republicans either. So, like, these three senators have a way outsized influence relative to public opinion, but just like relative to the party and relative to the country, broadly speaking. I'm not going to stop making fun of them, but the reality is also that the Senate sits at a 50-50 split, and you need Manchin and Sinema to pipe down and follow orders and vote yes on reconciliation bills later on in the year here. And if Manchin keeps this, I just don't, we need to have bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship thing going, you do run the serious risk of Manchin or Sinema. I mean, Sinema, who knows with her, defecting on the reconciliation bills later on in the year. So as far as policy goes, it really is running second to procedure, which is frankly the story in American politics in 2021, right? And I think the one that liberals, lefties, progressives are still really having a hard time getting their brain around right now because it stinks. It's not. This is not a fun narrative wherein really good things happen for us at the end of the day. Here, it's like boring. I think the term would be Yeoman's work. I hope I'm using that right because I'm not going to Google it. It's not that important. Like it's the boring work of keeping the country on. Like it's holding the Republicans accountable for 1/6. Why? Because it's not okay for elected officials from Ted Cruz to Josh Hawley to Paul Gosar to Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, there are a lot of people in Congress. I got another one, a new name this week from a judge. I'm going to do that story a little later on. I hadn't even heard of that representative, but he's also talking about like, oh, they look like tourists in there. I mean, you have a lot of elected officials in the Republican Party who are simply not up to muster in doing the business of the state at the level of representative. They don't rise to what we should expect out of the office. That's a broader problem too, especially when we're talking about the Democratic Party that has Governor Moonwalk and Andrew Cuomo and a Democratic electorate in those states that's uneasily okay with both of those people still leading their parties in those states. Like, I can't turn a blind eye to that either. But like, in the Capitol right now, on the national level, we have Republicans who don't really seem to recognize domestic terror when it's staring them in the face, because it's okay when it's got a certain face on it. That's really, really unnerving. And it's like hard for me to imagine a paradigm wherein we would pass something like Medicare for all or the Green New Deal, or you name a cool progressive item, and I mean, it's hard to imagine passing it on our own, like with just the Democrats. You have the Cinemas and the Mansions of the world, but it's even more sort of like far fetched for me to imagine like what a Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema wants, which is bipartisanship. We shall work across the aisle with these people who don't know domestic terrorism when it stares them in their face and seem to be actively trying to rewrite the election laws right now such that the only legitimate outcome is that Republicans win. And if a Republican doesn't win the election, it's not a legitimate outcome. I don't know how you work across the aisle with that. And I also don't know how you just pass stuff in the face of that, because the idea that there's not going to be a recoil effect is hard to imagine. And the other thing is, and we're already starting to see that this week, the realities of the conservative Supreme Court. It was very important to elect Biden. I know he's frustrating. I know. But imagine if Stephen Breyer, this doofus, who still won't retire at this point, I also frustrating. I know. Imagine if like 82-year-old Stephen Breyer, I don't know, stopped being 82 years old and started, doing the next chapter of existence, or non-existence, as it were. And the court got shifted to 7-2. We are already seeing that this court will eventually be a buzzsaw. And the tell here is a weird one. I'll get to that a little later on in the episode. What if I told you that the tell is actually a conservative jurist? He is the one. Well, I guess that's a hint. Well, there's only one female conservative jurist, but like he is the one that I'm particularly worried about. More on that a little later on in the episode here. So you've got the Supreme Court, which represents this big procedural roadblock. You have the dynamics of the 50-50 split. The fact that the Democrats don't really seem to have a good courtship with Murkowski going. She's okay, but like she's not going to be bold. She's not done in politics yet, and the Democrats don't seem to really have enough to buy her off with. Or like the trade-off would be like Anwar, and like I'm not willing to trade that one off too much, given what climate change represents, and the pressures therein. But then you have Collins, who has, I mean, look. She doesn't like the Democrats, guys. There's no way to reach her. They spent millions and millions of dollars stupidly. Thank you, Sarah Gideon. $20 well spent by me. Thank you. They spent a ton of money. I think like 20 million, 30 million, maybe more. Honestly, might have been more. Tremendous disaster candidate, like Jamie Harrison level from the last election. So Collins is not really a gettable vote here, because like the way you would have gotten her is basically said like, hey Susan, we can make this a walk in the park if you can play ball when Biden wins. Or like, like they could have finessed her. They didn't finesse her. It was like, hey, you totally voted for Kavanaugh, we're punishing you. I'm fine with that. I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that that's a bad part. Like she should definitely have been punished for voting for Kavanaugh. Murkowski saw it differently. What did Murkowski see that Collins didn't? That's sort of like the tell to me, because I don't think the Democrats had enough to reach Murkowski. So I think she just looked at the fact set and was like, Kavanaugh did it. Collins somehow didn't. And then gave us a big old scold lecture about why Kavanaugh is going to be great on the bench. But yeah, we decided to punish Collins, and we lost. It was a big gamble. We lost. And there's penalties for losing. So you can't reach her. Manchin, might be done with politics, might be flipping parties. Cinema, it appears, is on a suicide course. Not like an actual literal suicide course, but like does not care about long-term futures in politics. And what is motivating that? What is the reason for that? That is anyone's guess. Your guess on that is as good as mine. And that alarms me. It alarms me to no end because when you want to sit here and go, okay, what's the strategy for reaching someone like Sinema? I don't know. I don't know. The best I have been able to come up with is something. Well, I think they have a Republican governor, but it'd be like a paradigm if Arizona had a Democratic governor, wherein you had her resign, had a special election, and replaced her with another Democrat. And figured out what Sinema wanted to go away because clearly her entire political career has been about calculations. This is a person who went from being someone who identified with not like the far left of American politics, but like Green Party politics, like progressive politics in the 2010s. She came out and identified as part of the LGBTQ community in the early 2010s when it was not as like, I don't want to say trendy, but like acceptable. There's the right word for it. Like, you know what I mean? So she comes out and talks about that. Leave whatever lingering questions you might have about her story aside on that. Let's just take her on face value. She then drifts to the center of the Democratic Party. Okay, that's fine. She's running for election in Arizona. It's a purple state. The Democrats are trying to win. She is now to the right of Mark Kelly on a number of issues. And, okay, Arizona's a purple state. Why is she to the right of the other Democratic senator from Arizona? And also, like, okay, yes, Arizona's a purple state, but it's like purple and blue at this point. So, like, the bandwidth is available for someone like Sinema to creep back to the center of the Democratic Party, which would put her, like center left, right? I don't want to quibble on terms too much. You get the idea. She is inexplicably to the right of kind of where the landscape suggests she should be and what her background taken at face value suggests she should be. So you have to account for the change of heart with something. I tend to be a skeptic about right wing revelation that truly she's been converted to the Church of Centrism. Because, like, how again do these people in Capitol Hill look at the storming of Capitol Hill and the Republicans who cheered them on, some of whom are their colleagues? Josh Hawley, big fist in the air, Ted Cruz speaking at rallies day before. I've got stuff about Mark Meadows here in this episode. Like, this was, I know it seems like a year ago. I can't even, it doesn't feel that long ago to me, but like, I guess maybe it feels longer than 6 months ago, but it hasn't even been 6 months yet. I'm taping this on June 25th. July 6th would be the 1.5 year anniversary of the storming of the Capitol. So like, yeah, it is. It's very weird to imagine an earnest conversion to the Church of Centrism because you'd have to be dumb as a box of rocks or like living in a fantasy land or really just laboring under serious delusions in which I can't really reason with you. And like anyone who like can sort of soothsay with that kind of mindset's lying to you. But I think what better accounts for this is corruption and like, who is donating to Kristen Sinema? What are her arrangements after she gets out of politics? What are her plans? These are all really interesting and open questions. But when I see Rich Lowry of the National Review writing a glowing article about Joe Manchin, like the smear attacks against Joe Manchin have got to stop, stuff like that puts my antenna up and makes me go, is Joe Manchin flipping parties? When you see Kristen Sinema talking about the need to preserve the filibuster and everything with this like deep level of earnestness that beggars belief that she really believes this. okay, I start from the premise that people aren't really that stupid. Like oftentimes I sort of like mock like, well, they'd have to be really stupid. And my reason for saying that is, generally speaking, I don't believe people are that stupid. I tend to believe that people are that corrupt. And I tend to believe that Washington attracts a corrupt type of person. And like when Kristen Sinema is sitting and sipping margaritas and like, what was her like fuck off rings, or, doing the little curtsy and thumbs down and stuff, I don't think she's stupid. I think she knows exactly what she's doing. And I give her credit for that stuff. Um, since we're already on her, let's talk about Kristen Sinema. Here's Kristen Sinema's editorial. I'm going to just read a little bit of it. And you know what? I was going to say I'm not going to do it in the Kristen Sinema voice, but I can't make it that promise. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I don't know where it's going to go. It's going to be an adventure. Kristen Sinema, we have more to lose than to gain by ending the filibuster. Kristen Sinema, a Democrat, represents Arizona in the United States Senate. And like, just real quickly, Washington Post, a member of the Democratic Party. Democrat is the Democratic Party. Like, Democrat is the pejorative contraction that the Republicans came up with to make it sound like bureaucrat. I know it's a small thing. I know it's a thing that Dems really care about, but like, this should be a thing that the news outlets are smart enough to not let the Overton window get moved on. Anyways, everyday Arizonans are focused on the question that matters most in their daily lives. See, how am I supposed to do this without making fun of her? Uh, like, because here's my struggle, guys. Here's my struggle. I read that line. Everyday Arizonans are focused on the question that matters most in their daily lives. And like, my immediate knee-jerk response is, will the 60 vote threshold in the Senate be preserved to protect the minority rights that were decided to be very important at some point during the 19th century, well after many of the founders were long dead, and also during the crux of the buildup towards the Civil War? So the filibuster was primarily a tool used to like kind of navigate the straights and narrows of slave states and free states, like the noble tradition of the filibuster. Like, see, I want to just rag on this line by line. What am I supposed to do here? What am I supposed to do, people? Everyday Arizonans are focused on the question that matters most in their daily lives. Is my job secure? Can I expand my business? Can we afford college? What about healthcare? What about healthcare? When can I retire? Is my community safe? Again, stopping right here. Take this seriously for a second. If these are the things you care about, and these are the things you care about most, parliamentary procedure is a thing you obviously do not give a shit about. You care about outcomes. And that's what everyday Americans, they love to talk about them. But like, if you're thinking about it, everyday Americans do not care about the esoterica of the Senate parliamentarian. They care about, did you get it done? Didn't you get it done? And if you didn't get it done, coming in and telling us like a story about, well, you see, the rules are when you go to shoot it at 3-point, you got 5 seconds to inbound the ball. Like, they don't care. You either scored and you won the game, or you didn't score and you didn't win the game. And apparently Sinema gets this. Apparently. But meanwhile, much of Washington's focus is on a Senate rule requiring 60 votes to advance most legislation. Arizonans expect me to do what I promised when I ran for the House and the Senate, to be independent, like Arizona, and to work with anyone to achieve lasting results. Like, this is not really a thing that like she ever did, and she posts a link on this. So I want to get into what she is citing. It is her promise to be independent. She cites us to Ballotopedia. I'm going to share a screen for those who are supporting on patreon.com/DWATG. If you want to see this. Okay, here's your citation, Kristen Sinema. If we're going to play this game, let's do it. Kristen Sinema is a member of the Independent Party, no, the Democratic Party, and is a member of the United States Senate. Her term will end on January 3rd, 2025. God, that can't come soon enough. Also, like, we do need to get her out of office because she can be replaced. The re-election of Joe Biden's an awesome opportunity to do that. She defeated Martha McSally and Angela Green from the Green Party. So like she defeated another more progressive candidate. Sinema began her political career in the Arizona House of Representatives. She represented District 15 from 2005 until her election to the state Senate in 2010. Prior to running for office, she was the spokeswoman for the Green Party. Yeah, they expected her to be independent. Sure. Independent in the tradition of being a progressive who is independent. After receiving her Master's of Social Work and JD from Arizona State University, Sinema worked as an adjunct professor and faculty member for the Center for Progressive Leadership. Her career in public service began in the Arizona State Legislature in 2005, where her advocacy included in-state tuition for veterans at all Arizona public universities, combating sex trafficking, and calling for improvement to children's health care. Where is the part where it says she will buck her party numerous times? I am only bringing this up because she cites this as her source, as some promissory note that she made to the people. It's just gobbledygook. It's just a line. Arizonans expect me to do what I promised when I ran for the House and Senate, to be independent. There is no promise in there. This maybe serves as a metaphor for Christian Sinema, a bit hollow. Lasting results rather than temporary victories destined to be reversed, undermining the certainty that America's families and employers depend on. Okay, again, let's go through this line. Lasting results, yeah, no, that's nice. But you can't make that promise bipartisan or not because of the Supreme Court, and she knows that. I mean, every time the Affordable Care Act gets challenged, centrists and establishmentarians and the people who want to tell you everything's all right that now that Biden's in office, they will point to these sorts of things and say, see, the ACA was held up, it's fine. The fact that the ACA keeps getting challenged at the Supreme Court level tells you that this might not be lasting. And, oh, by the way, what is making the ACA last has absolutely nothing to do with bipartisanship. And I think we'll be discovering that soon enough when key statutes of the ACA do get struck down by this conservative majority. So bipartisanship is not some sort of silver bullet that inoculates a piece of legislation from the Supreme Court. So that's why she's wrong. The best way to achieve durable, lasting results? Bipartisan cooperation. I understand that bipartisanship seems outdated to many pundits. Hey, how you doing? But the difficult work of collaboration is what we expect in Arizona. Citation needed. And I still believe that the best way to achieve realistic solutions, instead of escalating all or nothing political battles that result in no action or whipsawing federal policy reversals, is bipartisanship. Since I was elected to Congress, a bipartisan approach has produced laws curbing suicide among our troops and veterans, boosting American manufacturing, and delivering for Native American communities. Delivering what? Combating hate crimes and protecting public lands. Okay, so let's take her at face value on all this stuff. I also like delivering for Native American communities. Sounds good. But unfortunately, the affairs of state are more than curbing suicide among the troops, boosting American manufacturing, and protecting some public lands. So she goes, it's no secret that I oppose eliminating the 60 vote threshold. I held the same view during the 3 terms in the U.S. House. Who cares? Like when it would have come up in the U.S. House, it's a Senate rule only. And the same after I was elected to the Senate in 2018. If anyone expected me to reverse my position because my party now controls the Senate, they should know that my approach to legislating in Congress is the same, whether in the minority or the majority. Yeah, you don't want to get anything done. See, too easy. What am I supposed to do, people? I'm a victim here. Once in a majority, it is tempting to believe that you will stay in the majority. Yeah, and a good way to do that is to actually get shit done. But a Democratic Senate minority used the 60 vote threshold just last year to filibuster a police reform proposal and a COVID relief bill that many Democrats viewed as inadequate. Those filibusters were mounted not as attempts to block progress, but to force continued negotiations towards better solutions. So, on both of those, if the Republicans really wanted to, could have done them through budget reconciliation. What she's citing here is hollow because the Republicans had ran out of reconciliation votes. The COVID relief bill was going to pass regardless. To cite that one's very disingenuous, right? Like eventually they were going to get something done. The police reform bill if they wanted to take those proposals and roll them into a reconciliation bill, they could. And this is the problem with the filibuster debate, broadly speaking. I'm going to have to just take a pause here real quickly because then we need to get into why she's bringing this all up, which is really nauseating. And it's the same thing with Joe Manchin. And then there's one person who really ought to know better and ought to be putting on his walking shoes right now rather than talking this crap. He's doing a lot of talking and not nearly enough walking. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But like the reason this is so wrong is because everything that the Republicans want to do, they largely can do through budget reconciliation. And there are some smart people right now who are probably going, but Chris, what about when they completely duffed repealing Obamacare? And they clearly had no plan to replace Obamacare, and they had to abandon ship because they were the dog that caught the parked car. McCain sort of spared them the embarrassment of dismantling the entire healthcare system going into the global pandemic. Yeah, no. You're right to point that out. That is a smart thing to point out. Whenever people talk about the Republicans being like ruthless, like and like super geniuses, no, they come up short every so often. They have no plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. I think the best argument here is that they're secretly okay with the Affordable Care Act because like they've had over a decade now to come up with some sort of compelling like version of policy for this, and they simply just don't have it. There's just no other way of looking at it here. But most things that the Republicans want to pass, and the big thing that they pass every time, right? It's a tax cut. What's the first thing they did? Bush, tax cut. What's the first thing they did with Trump? Tax cut. The tax cuts can all be done through budget reconciliation. They can keep screwing up the federal budget and thus controlling the federal Overton window of what is like doable vis-a-vis policy just by doing these massive tax cuts. That's the real problem here, is that even if you preserve the filibuster, the Republicans will still get their tax cuts. And I am someone who believes that for all of the bad policy desires that they have, the continuing problem that the Republicans have created, and the one that gets in the way of like the Democrats, progressives, whoever doing any sort of affirmative policy like advancement, is you don't have the money to do it. And if the Republicans keep punching a hole in federal revenue by letting the richest Americans and multinational corporations pay basically nothing in taxes or have really great tax loopholes, like I haven't even thought about this year, but given the inflation of property right now, I imagine that the mortgage interest deduction program this year, which is already one of the largest tax expenditures, is going to be through the roof. No pun intended this year. Like if I don't have this in front of me right now and it's not on the slate today, but if you told me that the mortgage interest deduction program was going to cost the federal government somewhere around $700 billion this year, that wouldn't shock me because of the way that real estate prices are getting inflated. And that, of course, is a program that advantages the top 20% of Americans. I mean, these are the real problems in the tax code. And all those sorts of games, McConnell can play with the 50 vote threshold. Even with getting Supreme Court justices on now the Democrats removed the 60 vote threshold for judges, which McConnell would have removed anyways if he needed to, because like getting the court was super important to what they're doing. They're losing on a national level. Like, we're talking about Arizona right now. Sinema's a thorn in the side, but like you have 2 Democratic senators in Arizona, and that is a sign of the times. Will a Republican probably get that seat again at some point? Sure. But the fact that Democrats can now get that seat is a big deal. It's no longer John McCain and John Kyle over there. It's a new day. You have Mark Kelly and Kristen Sinema. For as not inspiring as Kristen Sinema is, that is a small step in the right direction. So do I even want to? Yeah, no, I have to. So my God. Okay, this stanza. Yeah, no, it's poetry. What I'm reading here is a form of poetry. My support for retaining the 60 vote threshold is not based on the importance of any particular policy. It's based on what is best for our democracy. The filibuster compels moderation and helps protect the country from wild swings between opposing policy poles. I like policy poles. That's fun. Those who want to eliminate the legislative filibuster to pass the For the People Act. This is the one that allows people to vote, to have a voice in their democracy. Voting rights legislation I support and have co-sponsored. She made sure to put that in a parenthetical because she knows how stupid what she's about to say is. I would ask, would it be good for our country if we did, only to see that legislation rescinded in a few years from now and replaced by a nationwide voter ID law or restrictions on voting by mail in federal elections or over the objections of the minority? Okay, no, like this is great. Let's play this game. Here's the reality. They're going to try to do that anyways. And this wild swings between opposing policy polls, if you want to see the proof in the pudding here, Joe Biden promised that if we elected him as the Democratic nominee and not someone like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, that the Republicans following the election of Joe Biden would come to their senses. Instead, they stormed the fucking Capitol. I'm going to keep beating that drum because there was a cause and effect promised there that absolutely 100% has been proven to not have played out. And anyone in like mainstream media, in the Beltway, in politics, who's still asserting this is either laboring under delusions or lying to you. It can only be one of those two things because it didn't work out. So this idea that these Republicans are going to be super civil, I mean, just this week, we're not going to do Mark Milley and Matt Gaetz because everyone did Mark Milley and Matt Gaetz. Mark Milley was fantastic in that little clip. But this is where they're at. They're letting Matt Gaetz get the spotlight. Meanwhile, oh, by the way, he's got Roy Moore type issues. This is a party that went from Roy Moore, finally at long last, we must distance ourselves from this guy who almost certainly was dating a 19-year-old 20, 30 years ago. Not that that makes it okay, but again, 20, 30 years ago versus Matt Gaetz, who almost certainly was dating a 19-year-old and paying her via Venmo. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but say what you will about Roy Moore. We never heard about him paying the 19-year-old, did we? God help me. But the point here is that Matt Gaetz, by sort of any normal measure, is probably as bad, if not worse, than Roy Moore. And he's now still getting burned. Like the party has not jettisoned him. He's not on some sort of island. Like there is a clear sign of slippage here, a clear sign of decline. Ron DeSantis is now really the leader of the Republican Party at a government level, like at the governor's level. And this is a guy, I've played the campaign ad enough times on this show. I feel like you don't need to hear it again. But this is a guy who's like reading like say MAGA to his kids and stuff. Like this is not a party that's coming to their senses. This is a party that's going well the other way. So, I mean, when someone like Kristen Sinema or Joe Manchin or really like any your dopey friend who wants people to be nice, and your dopey friend's nice. It's not like they're a bad person. They're probably a great person. They're probably actually one of the best friends you got. Like my mom sort of works this way, and I love my mom, but like when she's thinking like this, she's thinking kind of dopey. This idea that like they're gonna get in the room and have a kumbaya session, and like hearts will heal. That if they come together and work together, we need to get into what that really looks like. And what that really looks like in this current dynamic is going to be something much more like the infrastructure bill, something that has a lot more of the vibe of the smoky back room, or maybe you might remember the phrase the swamp. Bipartisanship is the swamp. And so when Sinema and Manchin and centrists and like, I mean, never Trumpers too. Like some of whom have been on the show, and I like them, and I think these are people I think are great people, actually, like in their personal conduct, not like in their politics per se. But yeah, they're wrong. They're wrong, and it's like fundamentally wrong. And you would know this in your interpersonal interactions. Like you would know better than to interact with the guy at work who's kind of like, I'm pretty cool with the militia groups, that's what Sinema and Manchin are saying. Like, they want to hang out and have lunch with Larry, the dude who, spends time on Vigilant Citizen looking at how there's secret messages in the music videos and has an interest in some of these militia groups and freedom fighting groups. This is not good. This is not good. I mean, other things like, those who want to eliminate the legislative filibuster to empower federal agencies to better protect the environment and strengthen education. Would it be good for our country if we did, only to see federal agencies and programs shrunk, starved of resources, or abolished a few years from now? This is one other line from Sinema. And then we got to move on because I feel like we've kind of beaten this into the ground here. Maybe some of you felt like we did that 10 minutes ago. I'm not done yet. This last line, though, also wrong. The last line that we're doing. If you're really going to buy into that, what do you call Trump hollowing out the entire administrative state here over the last 4 years? If the filibuster was such a good bulwark for that, Trump's hollowing out of bureaucrat after bureaucrat in the State Department in particular would not have been able to work. It is by the very fact that the filibuster serves as no sort of bulwark against this that that was able to happen. So, yeah, no, Sinema, God, Jesus, she goes on a lot longer here. I'll just end it here. Instability, partisanship, and tribalism continue to infect our politics. The solution, however, is not to continuing to weaken our democracy's guardrails. So what about the For the People Act? If we eliminate the 60 vote threshold, we will lose much more than we gain. Oh my God. She basically she closed with the title of her article. But I mean, when she talks about we will lose, did she ever make a case in anything that I read of things that will? I mean, I guess she did make a case. I'm not going to take that away. She argued stupidly that things that can happen anyways would happen if we eliminated the filibuster, and she's right. Those things will happen whether or not we eliminate the filibuster. But if you eliminate those things, or if you eliminate the filibuster, those things will happen too. That's also true. That is very true. So let's talk about the infrastructure bill. Bipartisanship has triumphed here. And here's what really alarms me about this infrastructure bill before we get started. Joe Manchin, we talked about the audio from my No Labels pack. I love them. I love No Labels. Giving a lot of money to No Labels. Big No Labels fan. Joe Manchin was all like, we need to do some sort of bipartisan bill. I've got coffee mouth here. We got to do some sort of bipartisan bill because if we don't do a bipartisan bill, these progressives, these dopes like Christopher and Brito, and he said that. I thought that was really aggro. It was completely unnecessary, and yet he said that. He said that directly at me. It was very stupid. He's very stupid. But he said that, these Christopher and Brito types, they're going to say things like bipartisanship doesn't work because we can't even get things like a 1-6 commission that's bipartisan passed. It makes it look like maybe these Republicans kind of support domestic terror. Maybe they're kind of okay with it when it comes from a certain segment of the population. Yeah. So he was upset about me. And he's like, we need to get something passed. And Joe Biden was like, hey, Jack. And Joe Manchin's like, my name's Joe. And he's like, oh, yeah. But Joe Manchin and Joe Biden work together. Never trusted Joe in politics ever again. And they have come up with a proposal. Now, I guess to their modest credit here, originally they wanted 1.9. They had pre-negotiated themselves down to 800 or 900 billion. And then they walked themselves back up here to $1.2 trillion as a price tag allocated towards things that we're calling infrastructure. Now, Republicans are talking about that in one way to get rid of things like, oh, is that really infrastructure? I'm just saying that there's going to be a lot of pork in this bill. The whole way you get 10 Republicans at this point is by promising very corrupt specific things for their state. And maybe that's what an infrastructure bill is supposed to be. I actually tend to think it probably is, but also just trying to be real about what it is. We have a deal, said Joe Biden. This is coming from the BBC. After meeting the cross-party group of senators at the White House. The 8-year plan includes funding for roads, bridges, the power grid, public transport, and the internet. But the deal is far from done and said it depends on the passage of another larger spending bill. Joe Biden is the one who said that. I just said. That's dumb. At the White House on Thursday, Joe Biden praised the group of 5 Republicans and 5 Democratic senators who he met earlier and promised that the package would generate, quote, millions of jobs. We got to stop. I have been hearing this since I was in college, and this government makes jobs thing. Bruce Carlson has done an exhaustive, he's done the sort of comprehensive treatise on this, but it's got to stop. It's got to stop. Love you, Bruce. The investments are long overdue, said Mr. Biden, who has persisted with the cross-party negotiations despite the impatience and skepticism of some of his Democratic Party. See, the Brits know to call it the Democratic Party. Quote, we're in a race with China and the rest of the world for the 21st century, he added. This agreement signals to the world that we can function, deliver, and do significant things. All right, so real quickly, I like this line, and I know there are gonna be some people who are like, "Oh, Chris, but this is like sort of like xenophobic, xenophobic. We got to worry about that sort of stuff." Yes, 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 yes. I agree. However, here is what I worry about, and like I, frankly, at this point, when I'm doing the scale in my head, it's not that I'm not worried about this. This is the thing that I worry about, though. The United States right now spends about 5.5%, like half of 1% of the national GDP on infrastructure spending. Meanwhile, China, with their command and control economy and their different dictatorial, I mean, in the classic, like the state dictates, like the center of China dictates what the state is doing, they're spending about 5.5% of their GDP on infrastructure. Now, before people go, oh, well, we got to spend 5.5%, I'd argue that if you really get into what China spends their money on when it comes to infrastructure, they probably are overspending. It's hard to look at like the abandoned cities and like some of the things that they are building. They are building to keep their real estate market and stuff afloat, and like there's some funny money things going on there. That being said, I think that, given that the GDP of the United States and China are much closer than people realize, it is high time that our infrastructure spending catches up with China's percentage. And we need to be doing something closer to 3 to 4% at minimum. So I want us to go big. And one thing that is interesting in all of these developments, I am not all doom and gloom. And people always ask me, like, what is going to be my approach for the Biden administration? Like, and what will make you different than the cranky, lefty pundit? Is that like when I see like a point of optimism, I'll at least point to it with like ideally, hopefully, like some degree of like reasonable skepticism, because this is Joe Biden we're speaking of. But a thing that I think is good so far is that the Biden administration has, in some ways, not all the time, and it's frustrating when they don't. But in some ways, they've been very bold about price tags. Like they don't care, like they didn't care about the COVID relief bill. They're pretty bold on that. They stunk on student loans, but like on this infrastructure spending bill, 1.2, they could have negotiated themselves down to 900 and they didn't. They got themselves up, and I feel like they did make the case to Republicans that like, dude, we have to do this, you idiots. And there are enough of them who are like, well, I'm scared of my party, but you're right. But I'm scared, but you're right. Something to that effect. And so they whinged and they got on board. What's in the bill? Less than half of the money in the 8-year proposal is new spending. It includes $109 billion for roads and bridges, $66 billion for railways, $49 billion for public transport, and $25 billion for airports, according to the White House statement. A further $73 billion would be pumped into the power grid. How you gonna turn money into electricity, guys? And $65 billion for expanding Americans' access to broadband internet. So, like, if we're talking about policy winners and losers, like what would be a thing that I would have the Democrats doing to make the Republicans on their back heels? National Wi-Fi. Here's the time where you pitch the national Wi-Fi bill that you have a basic mid to low speed Wi-Fi that everyone can have access to at any time, no matter where you are in the country. If you are in a remote part of Wyoming and you're hiking, we can get emergency services out to you. Like, when people are like, well, why? That sounds like a luxury item. Like, we are one of the richest countries in the world. And I'm not talking about getting everyone's Xbox online thanks to a federal program here. I'm talking about making sure that people have phones and computers that can hook up to the internet to find jobs and find directions and do like basic mid-level internet functions. This is not supposed to be performance internet, and that's definitely not a thing I would propose. I don't think that if you want that, pay for that. But in the 21st century, everyone needs access to the internet. And it's stupid that we're not debating that as a fundamental right. And I'm saying stupid on our side. I mean, I don't expect the Republicans to get on board with that, but like, where's the chatter on that? Like, how many times have you heard this week that we need to be debating the internet as a fundamental right that every American needs to have access to? Once, twice, 3 times, a lady? Yeah, no, not often. And like, priorities. It continues to be a theme for me in 2021 here as well. A further $73 billion. Oh, I already talked about that. The package is meant to be paid for with unused coronavirus aid money and returned state jobless benefits. So there's the other devil in the details. Like, I mean, and you might go, okay, well, that's not a bad idea, though. Yeah, okay. But there you go. The plan will reportedly neither raise taxes on middle income Americans, and most importantly, it will ensure that the Trump tax cuts, just like the Bush tax cuts, just like what Obama did when he took office and he did his budget bill, he's going to ensure that the stupid tax cuts didn't need to be there. The corporate tax rate got sliced from 35% down to 21%, and Biden wanted to bring that back up to 28%, and Biden got beat on that. Be okay on my language here, but no, like he got beat on that, and that's bad. We cannot have the corporate tax rate at 21%. Because the problem here too is that you have all these loopholes that they're not closing, not really. And so you already had companies like Amazon and others. You've seen the graphics and all that stuff. I'm not gonna get into the meme crap that you can find on Twitter or Facebook about like these corporations that don't pay tax rates. I assume you know that. So when you cut their expected return by 1/3, which is like what 35 down to 21 effectively is, actually a little bit more, I guess. A little bit more. That's it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And Biden lost on that, and he knows better. He knows better. And it alarms me that we're punting on that because it seems like we're setting the table for Social Security or something else later on. There's been no merger with it yet, but you can't keep punching a hole in the budget and not eventually start talking about some of these. Really, like the mortgage interest deduction needs to go away. Like part of the problem with the real estate market right now is the mortgage interest deduction. That would help get the costs down, but that's a whole different rant. I have a big rant in me about the mortgage interest deduction. I think there's an episode coming on this based on this little rant here today. So there's another bill that Biden wants. And what is that bill? Biden wants to enact another $6 trillion spending package that would roll priorities into climate change, education, paid leave, childcare benefits. And Sanders is the one drafting that bill. So this is largely at two different levels. One, okay, it's bigger, and Biden's letting Sanders draft it. And are they going to leave Sanders on an island on this? I don't know. Look, on one hand, for the Bernie people, hey, it's great that Sanders is the point man on this. For the Bernie people, now is Sanders' probably last best moment in politics, and so like you can probably do a fair grading on his career based off of however he performs on this legislation. I'm saying this at the outset. But like when you're managing a $6 trillion bill and you're getting to be the point man and draft it, like Sanders now needs to be the steward because it's going to be called the Bernie budget. Like Sanders needs to be prepared to go out and fight on it. And that's really all there is to it. And the question is going to be, are Pelosi and Joe Biden and the other leadership Democrats going to hold ranks on this? To that point, Bernie needs to tap Warren a little bit, have Warren put her pressure on Chuck Schumer some more. She's been pretty good on that so far. I think she's definitely like put her arm around Schumer, like, I can help you, buddy. And Warren's also been shown to not be scared to fight the administration, like on the student loans guy this week here. But yeah, Sanders is going to need to really take the point on this because it seems like Biden is going to let this live or die sort of on Bernie's back. I don't think Biden's going to fight for it, right? Like he cares. He's saying that Pelosi cares, but Bernie and Warren, and AOC, and like Ilhan Omar, all the I'm putting Bernie up front here because the bill, I'm reading the BBC copy again, is being drafted by Bernie Sanders. So like not roasting him. He's the point man here. But like Pramila Jayapal, all of the progressives in Congress are going to need to fold ranks and really like come up with a very, very good and strong bill on this one, and make sure that it's not baggy so that they can protect it, so that they can try to get this thing passed. Because the end of the day, they're going to need to do this through reconciliation, which is what they're saying up front. Pelosi says there ain't going to be a bipartisan bill without a reconciliation bill. She might be full of shit, I know, but she's saying that up front. So we know this is a reconciliation game. This is not a bipartisan game. We need to make sure we control the frame on that. So when like Joe Manchin and Sinema are like, well, let's like lose like 7 months and like see if we can maybe make 10 friends across the aisle among the guys who like the domestic terrorists. Like, you don't have to do that. We already said this is a reconciliation bill. We need to just keep moving the Overton window to, no, Joe, Kristen, are you ready to go or don't you? Do you or don't you? Like, what do we need to do? Like, what do you need to do to shut up and actually play ball here? Or like, what threat do we need to make you guys have the fear of God? One of those two things needs to occur. Mitch McConnell, of course, to this point, because bipartisanship works. Mitch McConnell said that he was optimistic about the bill, but he's gone from optimism to pessimism as a result of the president's second press conference. That's the one where he said there's going to be a reconciliation bill. Guess who else stepped in? Totally Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. He might eventually doom the larger bill because the upper chamber is evenly split between the two parties. The BBC is much better at understanding American politics than a lot of American politics reporting. So he told reporters on Thursday, that sounds extremely, extremely high for us to take on that much debt. Yeah, a good way to avoid that would have been to repeal the Trump tax cuts, like finance and fund the bills you are passing. Mr. Biden has already signed a $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus check back in March. By the end of July, Congress faces a deadline to raise the debt limit to 2.9. So we might actually be facing a government shutdown here too. Like, this is a big problem. And the other big problem now, of course, is the For the People Act. And on that front, of course, Joe Manchin opposes this. But like, white guy doesn't see the importance of having voting access and the historicity of that. White dude from Virginia, maybe not a revelation, especially not when you're talking about Joe Manchin. However, when we're talking about President Barack Obama, I think it's really alarming to read, as I did in the Washington Post here. This is Obama endorses Senator Manchin's voting rights compromise. Barack Obama praised Joe Manchin's efforts to scale back the sweeping voting rights bill. Scale back the sweeping voting rights bill in hope of securing some Republican support, saying that the modified plan does not include everything he would want, but suggests that the stakes are too high to do nothing. Like, maybe you would want to suggest that to Joe Manchin. Manchin has tried to, quote, come up with some common sense reforms that the majority of Americans agree with, that Democrats and Republicans can agree with. And I think this is the really important part. It's not about the majority of Americans, right? It's about the 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans that have to, by the rules of Democratic bipartisanship, not by the rules of Republican bipartisanship. They just do shit on their own. But by the rules of Democratic bipartisanship, we have to make sure every one of those 10 patricians in the room, whether Democrat or Republican, see it. And if that's so, then surely us in the plebeian class, we will follow along dutifully and go, yeah, yes, they know what's best for us. Obama has said that he usually does not weigh in on the day-to-day scrum in Washington, but when he does, he sides with Joe Manchin. What's happening this week is more than just a partisan bill coming up or not coming up to vote. The Senate is poised to hold the test vote on Tuesday on that bill. Long story short, it didn't pass. And then Biden and Manchin had another conversation. Let me see here. What else we got? We can't wait until the next election because we have the same kinds of shenanigans that brought about January 6th. If we have that for a couple more election cycles, we're going to have a real problem in terms of our democracy long term. So, like, this is the ultimate problem. If you really believe that there are shenanigans that brought about January 6th, if you believe that the Georgia voting rights reform bill is an extension of those shenanigans and that there are clear statutes inside of the Georgia law that are vindicating the big lie that the election was stolen and that somehow if we could just audit the ballots and stuff, like, Trump would have won. And like, you don't have a rule that says this is the best practice without it sort of being reflective of something. And if you look retroactively on many of the rules in that Georgia law, many of those rules say pretty clearly that the big lie perpetrated by Trump's people, that it's a valid one. And like, that's a scary thing. Obama knows better. The Democrats know better. And the biggest problem with this brand of bipartisanship is it essentially serves as the handmaiden, as the heat sink for the Republicans and what they did. The fact that Barack Obama believes in Joe Manchin and his belief that you can reach across the aisle and reach these people who won't even vote on a 1/6 commission. I mean, Obama to volunteer that we can't have another 1/6 thing happen as he watched, just as everyone else did, and people that he knows personally go in and vote that they're not going to investigate the 1/6 commission and it's just going to be a Pelosi only thing. And like the House is going to do a little show pony thing on it. Like, yeah, no, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know how I don't know how you reasonably expect stuff to get done. That said, I like the fact that the reconciliation bill is in the hands of Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders has not been very good at using his bully pulpit in the past. It's frankly, if he was better at that, I don't think I'd have, I mean, policy issues aside, if he was actually good at the politics of stuff, I think I'd be well beyond fine with Bernie. My issue is that he's actually generally kind of like not great at the politics of stuff. And it's tough when when you got bad instincts and we use people as heuristics and you're using the heuristics of a person who's got bad instincts, I see problems there. Anyways, like that's just my thought on that. All right, so we've done that. Oh, also Manchin I don't want to do this, but Manchin told the Electric Utility Trade Group that the administration's pledge to cut carbon emissions is too aggressive. Manchin, of course, is home to a major coal producer in West Virginia, and he's defended coal-fired power plants at Edison Electric. And he said that coal is being singled out by environmentalists as a polluter, but this is a global climate. Yeah, okay, but coal's being used all over the globe, genius. Like, that's sort of the point here. Some of our environmental friends, they make us believe that we are polluting the whole climate. Yeah, you are, you dope. Like, that's how... This is the problem, right? Like, they say things and you can rebut their own argument with their own premises. Like, I don't have to go and dig up facts, but if you go, this is a global climate, ipso facto, when I pollute the ocean, I am polluting the globe. You're arguing, yes, it's smaller than you think because you're scaling it to America, but America's part of the world environment. So, like, you're saying it's this big in the American environment, but there's no such thing as the American environment. There's only the global environment, and in the global environment, it's this big. But that is not the same as saying there is no pollution, which Manchin and centrists will turn around and argue to you, to your face, in their same sentence. Like, I don't know how to take these people seriously. I don't. And here, I'll end on this because I want to do the Supreme Court, but maybe we'll do the Supreme Court in the next episode here because this seems like a good bite-sized chunk. I just, like, whenever I do the monologue shows, one, I hope you all appreciate, like, I got to get up to, do an hour on the mic. And two, after an hour, I mean, I'm already, I sip coffee and already, get the chap lips and all that shit anyways. But, like, my voice starts to go and I need to take a break. But we'll come back and we'll do the Supreme Court side of this here on the second show this weekend. Let's close out on this. Kamala Harris going to the border. So, if you're not extremely online, you have not been following this. And so, like, for my overseas friends, I'll kind of summarize it like this. There has been a big push by Republicans to start attacking Kamala Harris ahead of time. Some believe that Joe Biden is not going to run for a second term, and Kamala Harris is going to run as early as 2024. I think, obviously, the smart money knows that Kamala Harris will most certainly be seeking the nomination again in 2028. Now with a much better position as Mrs. Vice President versus someone who was, like, in real danger of finishing 5th or 6th in California, depending on how large the primary field was going into California. Like, if you had everyone there, I think, middle of the pack in California was a very realistic outcome for Kamala Harris. Masterstroke in politics of my lifetime, if I'm really saying. This is a person who was destined to be a senator, maybe go into Andrew Yang territory. I mean, think about that. Yeah, Andrew Yang, where, trying again, and the second one really flames him out. Like, Kamala Harris sold unbelievably high and got what she needed. She's now the vice president. Republicans know that they need to go after her. And they are. And they have been going after her and the administration for not going down to the border because they are now talking about the border crisis. This has been one of the main things they've grabbed onto in between discovering critical race theory, a 25, 30-year-old theory. I definitely had some critical race theory in college. College wasn't that recent ago. Like the last years of college were like 12, 13 years ago. So it's been a minute. Critical race theory's been around. 2007, 2008. Yeah. So anyways, Kamala Harris is a target in between this miasma of outrages of the week, Suskade, critical race theory. Kamala Harris, though, remains a focus, and they're smart to focus on her because they know that they're going to be running against her. And the Republicans who would like to run against her at some point are positioning themselves against her. I think a guy like Greg Abbott really is frustrated that he simply can't make the leap to national politics. And no, that was not like a tasteless joke. I swear to God, as much as I don't like Greg Abbott, I'm not gonna lie though. I think the wheelchair probably does hurt him in a Republican field because the Republican primary field is so rough and tumble that the Republican primary field is rough and tumble. Let us not forget how Trump handled reporters and Megyn Kelly and other people with disabilities and stuff. And is Republican politics moving away from that? Or did we think about Matt Gaetz and Roy Moore earlier and kind of go, maybe we're backsliding? For 8 years from now, what sort of discourse will be acceptable among keeping it real in the Republican Party? Yeah, I don't know. Greg Abbott doesn't seem to me to be like a guy who's destined for that. But Ron DeSantis certainly is. And Ron DeSantis will be looking for a position or an opportunity to position himself against Harris. Greg Abbott's trying to do that as well. And they've been trying, and Ted Cruz, of course, who still has dreams of higher office, but they will never, ever, ever come true because he's hated even within his own party. And he knows that. He does. This is a guy just trying to hang on in Texas right now. And that's not entirely sure. And that's not entirely in the bag. There we go. There's the phrase I'm looking for here. So Cruz, others have been pressuring Harris to go down to the border. She's going down to the border. Here's my thought on this. What the Democrats should do following this is they should go down to the border and go, wow, I can't believe how fucked up all these detention centers are that you've been running. Yes, I know that it's sort of disingenuous because the Democrats have a hand in the architecture of many of these things. I'm aware. But this is politics, baby. You lie in politics. Have we learned nothing from Trump? You go, I can't believe how disgusting these Trump detention centers are. We're closing them all down. You all ought to be ashamed of yourself. I've heard such horrible stories down here. I'm so glad I came down the border. It was a great idea that you had me do this. Just beat the Republicans into sand over this and come up with a border policy that's very liberal, informed by the trip that the Republicans besieged them to do. They won't do this. Instead, they're absolutely scared of their own shadows. And that's continues to be the problem for the Democratic Party in politics. I just kind of wrap up my big themes here for today. Big themes episode on the domestic affairs thing. On our side, so you have on the elections level, before we even get into policy, we got to start winning elections again. You have the Electoral College standing in the way. You have the 60 vote threshold in the Senate standing in the way. So you have the filibuster. You have these election laws that are absolutely insane. And that becomes a big procedural bulwark to getting things done. You got to win office. You got to win state office. You got to get senators elected. And it's hard to do that if the Republicans continue to dictate what is and isn't acceptable voting behaviors and what isn't acceptable election laws. Democrats have not been very good at state and local office. At the court level, where is Joe Biden's blue ribbon commission on the Supreme Court? I'm sure they're going to come up with something really ambitious. And I'm sure that Sinema and Manchin, who seem to be very open-minded about other things, are going to embrace an expansion of the court, for civility's sake and bipartisanship. You would think they, of all people, would be very open to the idea that the court works best when it's split 50-50 down the middle. And if there's 6 Republican jurists, there ought to be 6 Democratic jurists, right? 12? And we just have to really kind of bop it out and really kind of, reach across the aisle and come up with decisions that everyone can live with. You'd think they'd be open to that. You'd think, right? Right. Surely if centrism's serious, but it's not, of course. But to that point, this is where the left and liberals should be calling out the centrists. If they really believe this shit, you can make these arguments back at them and make them prove to everyone that they don't believe it, so that the Jake Tappers of the world are like, huh, that doesn't really make sense. Huh. Like, because, you can get Tapper to go like, all right, that's stupid, though. What you're saying is actually stupid. Even though he's sort of prone to these sorts of sensibilities. And then you have Biden and Harris, who are scared to do things through the executive branch. And like this is perhaps the most maddening, because it's just scared of their own shadow. Harris doesn't need to go down to the border. And if she did, I mean, and the fact that she said the stupid, well, I haven't been to Europe either line, like that didn't help her either. It seemed incredulous. It seemed, it wasn't quite Herman Cain talking about why he doesn't need to know about Uzbekistan. But it did have a little bit of that Herman Cain energy about it. Rest in peace, big man. Yeah. So like, this is the problem at the Supreme Court level. We have a 6-3 majority on the conservative side. In Congress, you have a 50 vote threshold that's going to be a challenge to get to because of Sinema and Manchin. And then at the presidential level, you have Harris and Biden, who Biden has this bipartisanship fetish. Biden has this, I wish things were the way they used to be. Things were better back when I was younger. Which is like, look, I know we can all identify this trend. Even old people can identify this trend, right? Like they say it, but it's a lens that you think through. It's a prism that you look through. The analogy I'll close with here. Like I was trying to explain bias the other day in music. But I think it's actually kind of useful, just like generally speaking, in terms of bias, because bias can be really subtle sometimes. So Western music has this built-in bias that there are 12 notes. A sharp, B, no B sharp, C sharp, and there are 12 notes in the system. But all that music is doing, all that Western frequency division is doing, is taking the overall broad frequency spectrum, which goes all the way from 20 hertz to the human ear. It goes below that, obviously, and all the way up to 20,000 hertz, again, to the human ear, and you lose most of that stuff as you get older, so it's probably closer to 16,000, 17,000, depending on how old you are. It might be getting a little bit lower. Go and get your hearing checked, kids. No, but like seriously, like that's how that works. Hey, right side yourself. So the way Western music works, bias number one, is that we've decided that there is a certain division of the frequency spectrum that is auditorily pleasing. And that's unique to European music. That's not necessarily shared by Middle Eastern music, like Turkish music. It's not shared by Indian music. It's not shared by like Chinese music, African music. All sorts of different frequency divisions exist all over the world. But most people in the West, and most music theory teachers like myself, don't even ever note that bias. I always make it a point in my presentations in music theory class, and I know, woke music theory. No, I try to keep it more neutral than that. I don't try to get political, but I always try to bring that up, because it's like that anecdote about, the old fish and the young fish, and he's like, how's the water? And they're like, what's water? I'm just going to spare you because you've heard it like probably 10 times in your life at this point. Everyone loves that David Foster Wallace anecdote. But the idea is that bias is all around you. And that translates even more to the piano. So now, in order to get the frequency spectrum to work out, but also to be playable, they realized that it was easier to not have 12 keys that were all equidistant. Equidistant meaning like every key is the same size as a white key. They realized that actually it helps to have two different layers and rows of keys, the white keys and the black keys. Okay, right? So some of these keys are of different size. That's an inequity that's already being presented there. However, that inequity also moves one to play the instrument a certain way. And in the case of the piano, it creates a bias towards the note C, or the key C major or A minor. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you just go to the piano and like you're a dilettante, if you know nothing about the piano, and like it's almost better if you know nothing, and you were told sit down and try to make music, your gut instinct would be, okay, I'm going to delicately try some of these white keys and see if I can make a thing that sounds like a chord happen. And if you did that, you'd be playing with no sharps, no flats, another bias that we've come up with, and it would be in C major almost certainly. All of these things sort of like nudge you a certain way. Like, I was thinking about this in the context of Ben Shapiro and critical race theory. Like I saw a clip of him. on critical race theory. I'm not going to do a whole seg on that. But I was reminded of all of the times he likes to invoke Western music theory. And I just thought, maybe it might be useful to have a way of understanding bias that invokes the Western music theory that he loves oh so much. Western music theory is nothing without its biases. And being able to see through those biases is really hard. It's a real exercise. So to bring this back to like Joe Biden and nostalgia, it's one thing to be able to identify those biases. It's another thing to be able to sit down on the piano and go, I need to come up with something original, and I need to not play with a white key bias. My answer to that's a transpose button. Unfortunately, life doesn't have one of those. And so we have to kind of come up with ways of thinking and patterns and exercises in thinking to serve as our own way of transposing out of that one bias, out of that one frame, out of that one matrix, that C major matrix. Okay, I know that was heady and a little music nerdy, and probably some of you are like, okay, God, will you stop? Look, David Hume, who I am definitely highly, very like, or very high, at least. But David Hume used to do all these metaphors involving billiards, and they were charming, and it was a horrible guy by any modern standards, and it's not really a great defense of me. Anyways, that's going to do it for this episode of Don't Worry About the Government. My name is Chris Novembrino. You can support the show over at patreon.com/DWATG. I'll be back sooner rather than later to do a recap of this term of the Supreme Court. We just went a little bit long talking about the infrastructure bill and sort of the state of play in Washington, D.C. right now, but I thought it would be cool to do kind of a big picture sort of episode like this. Haven't done one of those in a while. You can follow the show at DWATG. You can support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And if any of those links are broken or something's wrong, please let me know, because like right now I am the tech support. So I'm the guy at DWATG or Chris Novembrino at gmail.com. We're doing a big SEO push right now. We're doing an SEO push of sorts. Hoping to get some new numbers here, getting some new listenership, trying to grow out the show. I'm trying to support the show on the back end. I know we had a request for news from Latin America. To that point, if you all have any requests of topics that I have not gotten into or questions or whatever, please shoot them my way, chrisnovembrino at gmail.com or at DWATG on Twitter. That's going to do it for this episode of Don't Worry About the Government, a listener-supported podcast. I want to thank you all so much for listening. And until the next one, bye-bye.